AITA for throwing my roommate out after catching her systematically violating my privacy. They say you never truly know someone until you live with them, but I never expected that my quiet, seemingly sweet roommate was spending her days systematically dismantling my privacy. I'm a 26-year-old remote professional, and for the last 10 months, I shared my apartment with Chloe, a girl who seemed like the absolute perfect match. She was tidy, soft-spoken, and always kept to her own schedule. But a few weeks ago, an unsettling series of minor coincidences began to make me feel deeply uncomfortable in my own home. Things in my private room were shifting by millimeters. A journal wasn't where I left it. A specific medical file on my desk was at a slightly different angle. When I brought up my concerns, Chloe used a very gentle, comforting narrative strategy, telling me I was just overworking and becoming paranoid. But my gut instinct refused to quiet down. I decided to install a discreet, motion-activated security camera in my room while I went out for a brief 2-hour coffee meeting. What that camera captured didn't just cross a boundary, it completely altered how I view basic human psychology. Chloe wasn't just glancing at my desk. She was conducting a full, detailed exploration of my entire personal history, documents, and personal journals. When I handed her an immediate eviction notice, she and her family launched a massive smear campaign against me, calling me heartless for putting her out on such short notice. If you want to know how a silent strategy can uncover hidden behavioral patterns right under your nose, listen to the very end. I have always valued structure, order, and a quiet personal environment. Working as a digital content consultant means my home is not just my living space. It is my office and my mental sanctuary. When my previous lease ended, I decided to find a 2-bedroom apartment to split the high rental costs of the city. After reviewing dozens of applications, I selected Chloe. On paper and during our initial meetings, she appeared to be the ideal co-tenant. She possessed a calm, respectful demeanor, worked steady hours at an administrative office, and expressed a deep appreciation for personal space and boundaries. For the first 8 months of our arrangement, our apartment operated with absolute fluidity. We shared chores evenly, respected each other's quiet hours, and occasionally shared polite, casual conversations in the kitchen about our respective days. However, the psychological atmosphere of the apartment began to undergo a subtle, almost imperceptible transformation around the beginning of the 9th month. It started with minor details that were incredibly difficult to quantify at first. I am a meticulous person. I place my personal belongings in very specific arrangements. One evening, after returning from a weekend trip to visit my mother, I noticed that the desk drawer in my bedroom, which contained my personal financial records and old tax documents, was not fully aligned with the frame. It was open by perhaps half an inch. I distinctly recalled closing it firmly before leaving. I brushed it off, attributing it to my own potential forgetfulness. But over the next 3 weeks, the anomalies grew more frequent and increasingly unsettling. One afternoon, I walked into my room and noticed that my personal journal, which I habitually kept tucked beneath a stack of design magazines on my nightstand, was sitting slightly askew, its cover visibly peeking out. Later that week, a folder containing confidential medical documents regarding a past health issue appeared to have its tabs arranged in the reverse order of how I kept them. Each time I noticed these shifts, a wave of cold anxiety would hit my stomach, but I constantly tried to gaslit myself into believing I was simply experiencing stress-induced paranoia from my heavy workload. I eventually decided to approach Chloe about it in a very non-confrontational, polite manner. One evening while we were preparing dinner, I casually mentioned that I felt like things in my room were being moved, and asked if she had perhaps entered the space to check on the window seals or air vents while I was out. Chloe turned to me with an expression of profound, empathetic concern. She shook her head softly, wiped her hands on a towel, and spoke with a beautifully comforting tone. "Oh, absolutely not," she said, her eyes wide with sincerity. "You know I would never cross that boundary. Honestly, you've been working 12-hour days lately. Do you think the lack of sleep might be making you misplace things? I do that all the time when I'm overwhelmed." Her narrative strategy was incredibly effective. She made me feel completely validated while subtly planting the seed that the issue lay entirely within my own fragile mental state. Despite Chloe's comforting reassurances, the psychological discomfort in my own home continued to intensify. The human brain has a powerful instinct for when its personal sanctuary has been compromised, and my gut refused to accept her explanation. Every time I left the apartment, even for an hour to pick up groceries, I felt a heavy weight of apprehension. I realized that words and casual questions would never yield the truth from someone who possessed such a polished, innocent behavioral front. I needed objective, undeniable data to either clear my roommate's name or confirm my deepest fears. On a Tuesday morning, I purchased a small, high-definition security camera that blended seamlessly into the decor of my bookshelf. It was motion activated and streamed a live video feed directly to an encrypted application on my phone. I set it up to capture a wide-angle view of my desk, my closet, and my nightstand. The next afternoon, I purposefully told Chloe that I was heading across town for a lengthy corporate meeting and a subsequent dinner with a client, indicating that I would be out of the apartment for at least 5 to 6 hours. In reality, I walked down to a quiet coffee shop exactly 3 blocks away, sat at a corner table, and opened the application on my laptop. Exactly 45 minutes after I closed the front door of the apartment, my phone vibrated with a motion alert notification. My breath hitched as I tapped the screen to view the live feed. The bedroom door, which I had locked with a basic privacy key before leaving, slowly opened. Chloe walked into my private room. There was no hesitation in her body language. There was no look of guilt or nervousness on her face. Her behavioral composure was completely relaxed, indicating that this was a routine she had practiced many times before. I watched in absolute, stunned silence as she walked directly to my desk. She produced a small silver paperclip from her pocket and effortlessly bypassed the simple lock on my personal filing cabinet within seconds. For the next hour, I sat in that crowded coffee shop, watching my roommate systematically dismantle my life. She pulled out my financial files, carefully photographing my bank statements and earnings sheets with her phone. She then moved to my nightstand, pulled out my private journal, and sat comfortably in my desk chair, leisurely reading through pages of my most intimate psychological reflections, personal struggles, and family history. She even went into my closet, examining the tags of my clothing and looking through personal boxes of childhood photographs. She was incredibly careful. Whenever she finished examining an item, she would utilize a meticulous method to place it back almost exactly where it belonged, smoothing down the edges of papers and closing drawers to within a millimeter of their original position. I realized with absolute clarity that her previous advice about my overwork and paranoia was a deeply calculated gaslighting strategy designed to keep me blind while she explored my entire identity. The anger that filled me wasn't loud or chaotic. It was a cold, ironclad resolve. I did not storm back to the apartment screaming. I knew that dealing with a highly manipulative behavioral style required absolute evidence and an unshakable boundary. I sat at the coffee shop for another hour, downloading the high-definition video archive, making multiple secure backups on my cloud drive, and saving the exact timestamps of her entry and exit. Once the data was safely locked away, I contacted my landlord, explained the situation with the video evidence, and requested an immediate lock change for my bedroom door, which was granted due to the severe breach of tenant safety. I returned to the apartment later that evening. Chloe was sitting on the living room sofa, watching television, looking entirely peaceful. When I walked in, she smiled warmly and asked, "How was your long meeting? You look exhausted." I didn't smile back. I walked over to the kitchen table, placed a formal notarized 24-hour eviction notice on the surface, and looked directly into her eyes. "You have until tomorrow evening to completely pack your belongings and vacate this apartment," I said, my voice completely flat, calm, and deliberate. Chloe's expression immediately shifted from warmth to an absolute facade of defensive outrage. She stood up, her voice rising as she attempted to deploy a loud narrative strategy to dominate the conversation. "Are you completely insane?" she yelled. "You can't just throw me out because you're having some kind of mental episode. I haven't done anything wrong. You are violating our roommate agreement." I calmly pulled out my phone, opened the video file, and turned the screen toward her. The screen displayed the crisp, clear image of her sitting in my chair, holding my private journal up to her face while photographing my financial files. The silence that hit the room was deafening. The defensive anger vanished from Chloe's face, replaced by a sudden, terrifying, pale stillness. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The absolute breakdown of her innocent persona was complete. "The locks on my room have already been changed," I told her softly. "If you are not gone by tomorrow at 6 p.m. with all your belongings, the video file will be forwarded directly to your employer's HR department, your family, and the local authorities for illegal entry and data theft. Do not speak to me for the remainder of your time here." I turned around, walked into my room, and locked the door, leaving her alone in the crushing weight of her own uncovered actions. The next 24 hours were an exercise in extreme psychological pressure. Chloe spent the night and the following morning packing her boxes in absolute, resentful silence. But she didn't leave quietly behind the scenes. By noon, my phone began to blow up with a barrage of text messages and social media notifications from her mother, her sister, and several of her close friends. Her family launched a highly coordinated narrative strategy against me, attempting to paint me as an unfeeling toxic monster. Her mother sent me a lengthy message saying, "Chloe is a young, fragile girl who made a minor mistake out of simple curiosity. To throw her out onto the street with 24 hours notice over a lack of privacy is completely heartless and disproportionate. You are ruining her life and her rental history over pure bitterness." Her friends posted vague updates online about cold, unstable people who treat roommates like garbage. For a brief moment, the immense social pressure made me question my own actions. I wondered if I should have given her a standard 30 days, or if I had acted too harshly by enforcing such a sudden separation. But then I looked back at the security footage. I reminded myself that Chloe had spent months looking me in the eyes, watching me suffer from anxiety and self-doubt, and actively using that suffering to cover up her systematic daily theft of my private life. She wasn't sorry for violating my sanctuary. She was devastated that her polished mask had been permanently removed. At exactly 5:30 p.m., Chloe moved her final box out of the apartment. She handed her keys to the building manager without making eye contact with me and left the property for good. I spent the rest of the evening deep cleaning the space, reclaiming the psychological atmosphere of my home, and resetting my boundaries. When I posted a brief, anonymous summary of the situation on a local community forum to seek a sanity check, the response was overwhelming. The community overwhelmingly validated my decision, stating that a home ceases to be a home the moment your privacy is systematically compromised by the person sharing your rent. I chose to completely block Chloe and her entire toxic family from my life, ensuring they could never again access my personal sphere. I learned a profound lesson about human behavior. Some people use politeness as a shield to commit the most unsettling violations, and the only way to protect your sanity is to meet their deception with absolute unyielding boundaries. So tell me, am I the a-hole?